Well guys, here we got part 2 of our beef jerky making video. Of course, just to give you a bit of a recap, in the last video we cut up our roast into little thin type slices to prepare for the marinating process. And then we mixed the marinade itself and of course added the meat to it. And over the last 48 hours, it's been marinating now in the fridge, of course. With raw meat, you're going to want to try to keep it as cool as possible for, the time period. And now that it's done marinating, it's time to put it on the dehydrator tray. Now, of course, over the last 48 hours, I have turned it and stirred it a few times, bringing the top pieces to the bottom and the bottom pieces to the top. Try to get an even full marinade, and that way everything is fully covered, fully coated, if you will. So yeah, we'll pull the container out of the fridge. And of course, taking the lid off, and that's what you got. Now what I'll do is I'll put a side-by-side photo between what it was before it started marinating to what it is now. You'll notice the color difference. Of course, the darkness is mainly the soy sauce. It does darken the meat. And of course, the spices you put in will have soaked and penetrated the meat kind of with the soy sauce themselves. Now, of course, we'll take the strips of beef and put it on the dehydrator tray and get preparation going for the dehydration process. So guys, what you see is I have the one dehydrator tray that I'm going to be filling in the sink. I've got the stack of trays over here, and then I have the dehydrator and the meat over here on the other counter. So basically I'm going to be taking the meat and putting it onto the tray and then shaking it a little bit to get the excess marinade off it, and back on the dehydrator itself and ready to be plugged in. So let's get at her and see how she goes. So of course, first of all, you're going to want to wash your hands, make sure your hands are all clean and all that. Partly because, well, this is a food preparation surface. Again, make sure everything's clean. Of course, you've been touching your camera, which I'm sure hasn't been wiped down either. So, while we do a bit of cleanup and get things going. So, you take your meat and pretty much put it on the tray. Now, keeping in mind you're going to have a lot of meat here, so you're going to want to try to put her as tight as possible. It can be touching because, yes, she will shrink up a bit, leaving up gaps and all that. Which is what the dehydration process is going to do. Pretty much, you can keep a sink full of water if you want. If you want to wipe your hands down once in a while, go ahead. Wiping down your preparation surfaces and all that. There's no real wrong way to put meat on a dehydration tray. There's no real by the book or textbook way to do it either. There's just, it needs to be laid out, preferably as flat as possible, and try not to overlap the pieces either. You want to make sure they're, pretty much their own, they have their own space, and that, like I said, she will shrink up a bit, so it can be touching. That's not really gonna make much of a difference there. And of course, being we had those tinier pieces, that's a great way to fill in gaps in the tray that the bigger pieces won't fill. Pretty much, no matter how you're going to cut your meat, you're always going to have those little gap or little odds pieces to fill in. And no matter how you put it on the tray itself, there's always going to be a need for them. So there you go, guys, we have our first tray all filled up, pretty much all good to go onto the dehydrator. So what I'll do is I'll give it a bit of a shake to get any of the excess marinade off it. and then over onto the dehydrator to be preparation for dehydration. So what I'll do is I'll fill up the next trays, and then pretty much we'll go from there. So in the meantime, guys, enjoy some Arcane Fire and Ice music while I am getting things done. Okay guys, so we got all 4 trays of the dehydrator filled up. Of course, the last tray, or top tray, is kind of all the odds and ends of small pieces that were kind of left in the bottom of the container. Over here on the dehydrator we have the other 3 trays with pretty much all the full size pieces throughout them, with some of the small odds and ends ones just to fill in the gaps. Of course, over here we have our wonderful marinade mix, which some people do save it. I personally will discard it because 1, being there is raw meat in it. 2, last time I froze it to use for the second time around, it kind of left a tangy taste to the meat, which I just as soon didn't really care for. So I just as soon mix up a new batch of marinade every time I go to make my jerky. So guys, we'll put this tray on top and then give her a plug in and start the drying process. So guys, we got all the trays up on the dehydrator, have the dehydrator going over on the dehydration station, and we're pretty much ready to give her a plug in. So yeah, there you go, the fan is fired up. Of course, I'd recommend you testing out your dehydrator just to make sure it's working before starting all your marinating process and happen to be caught flat-footed. Of course, like if your dehydrator is at all like mine, it would have been sitting in a cupboard and would have needed to have been cleaned up anyway. So we'll put the lid on her and check back in probably 24 hours. It should be getting fairly dry by then. Every few hours, you know, give her a check-in. You may need to rotate the trays, rotating the top tray to the top, you know, vice versa, because the airflow will be minimal at the top is what it is at the bottom. So guys, we'll let the jerky here dehydrate for a bit, and then we'll check back in. Well guys, so here we are a few hours later. Just going to check on the jerky. So as you see, we have the trays here in front of us. Checking on the jerky, checking on the moisture content. Of course, the thicker pieces are still going to be a little bit on the moist side. The thinner ones will have dehydrated quicker, and they'll be getting to the point where they're good. You know, the thicker ones, like I said, are still needing to be a little bit longer. But if you want to rotate your trays, you know, keep them rotated every few hours so the dehydration gets to be equal or normal. You know, if you want to rotate your trays, you can. Then that way everything kind of gets dehydrated equally. But like I said, guys, you know, she's going fairly well. The thicker pieces needing a little bit longer. The thinner ones are almost ready to come off. You want to have these things to be fairly dry, not super dry till they're hard, but fairly dry enough to take most of the moisture out of it. But yeah, probably another little bit here, guys, and she'll be good to go. Well, guys, here we go. This is the conclusion to part 2 of the making of beef jerky. Of course, we let her dehydrate now for, I believe it's been about 24 to 36 hours, or until the jerky is dry enough to your taste. So pull off the lid here, and yes, I've been through it, and I have sampled a couple of pieces to make sure it's up to standard. Now, as you notice here, she still is a little bit moist, but not completely dry to where it shatters. You know, you want to still have some to chew on a bit. So we'll start picking it off here, off the trays. Now, one thing you have to be careful is, of course, now it's gone through the dehydration process, she sometimes wants to stick to these little plastic trays. I imagine probably 20 years ago these dehydrator trays would have been metal, probably in fact aluminum or something. But the plastic ones are what we have to deal with nowadays. So yeah, 1 tray down and 2 more to go. Just picking off the pieces. Of course, you're checking for any that are a little bit too wet so far. Anything that are, you know, undesirable. Most of the time you can get a good batch of jerky out of dehydration. Once in a while you'll find a still wet piece. Now you can choose to dehydrate those pieces a little more, a little longer, or you can choose just to simply discard it and be done with her. So yeah, so far in this batch, guys, we're doing fairly well. All our pieces are fairly well dried, fairly well good. They're not, you know, pink or raw in the middle. Now, I'm not exactly sure what the weight is, but it was about 5 pounds, 5.5 pounds when we started. Given the fact that we probably lost a good, I don't know, 40% or 50% moisture out of the meat, we're probably still sitting at about 3 pounds of jerky that it yielded, you know, which is still fairly decent. Now, I've of course sampled this. Now, it's a fairly good recipe that I got this time. This isn't the one that I normally would use. It's one I pulled off of the internet, and it actually turned out fairly well. Just to go through the process, as you've seen there in part 1, we cut up our roast, we mixed our marinade mix, added it to the meat, and pretty much let her dehydrate. And this is the final result that we ended up with. If you have any comments or questions or concerns, you know, leave them below. Send me a PM, I will answer them back. So as always, guys, thank you for watching part 2 of beef jerky video. Make sure and check out part 1, or else this video will make no sense to you. So as always, thanks for watching Maxwell's World. Comment, subscribe, and enjoy.